The first sound was water. Not the gentle lap of a mountain lake against timber, but the sharp slap, slap, slap of waves against fiberglass, louder than it had any right to be at dawn. I sat upright in the bunk of my uncle's old cabin cruiser, heart hammering, the silence of the Rockies shattered by a rhythm that didn't belong. When I stumbled up the short steps to the deck, coffee still bitter on my tongue, I froze. Someone had marked the boat, not with dust or childish scratches, no. Across 40 feet of white fiberglass, the word trash screamed in neon orange, dripping like fresh blood. The paint was so what it glistened under the morning sun, sliding into the water, leaving streaks that looked like wounds. My Uncle Ezra had kept this boat pristine for 30 years. Storms hadn't scarred it. Ice hadn't cracked it. Time itself had barely dared to touch it. And now, overnight, it had been violated, turned into a billboard of shame for the whole lake to see. A single paper flapped against the windshield, taped down with military precision. Violation notice. Remove boat within 72 hours. Signed in looping, arrogant handwriting. Delilah Thornfield, President, Lakeside Estates, HOA. I didn't need to smell the cheap perfume on the paper to know whose hand delivered it. Uncle Ezra used to say Alpine Lake was God's mirror. A stretch of water, so clear you could count trout fins 20 feet below the surface, framed by jagged peaks that kept the world at bay. For him, this cabin wasn't a luxury, it was a rebellion. He'd built his dock by hand, cut logs with his own saw, refused mortgages, fees, or anyone else's permission. When he died and left the place to me, I thought I'd inherited peace. After 20 years running Navy logistics across hostile oceans, peace sounded like a foreign language I wanted to learn. But peace didn't exist here. Not anymore. Across the water stood the fortress. Glass walls, perfect angles, a driveway curled like a snake around a BMW that had never seen a gravel road. Delilah Thornfield lived there like a queen in exile, armed not with soldiers but with rules. She patrolled with clipboards, dictated with notices, and punished with fines that bled neighbors into submission. The stories came in whispers. Families fined into selling. Gardens destroyed for daring to bloom in the wrong shade. A mailbox repainted 3 times because the color wasn't community approved. She had ruled for a decade, and people feared her more than they feared death. And now she'd set her sights on me. I ran my hand along the dripping paint, my skin coming away stained orange. My daughter Sage's face flashed in my mind. Her 15-year-old scowl, the way she curled into herself every time she visited my old San Diego apartment, already halfway gone to a life I wasn't part of. This boat was supposed to be for her. For us. Fishing weekends. Laughter instead of silence. A place where she could remember that her dad wasn't just the guy who failed her mom. And now someone had branded it like garbage. I didn't rage. Not yet. Rage is too loud. My Navy years had trained something colder into me. Silence before the storm. When your convoy gets hit at sea, you don't scream. You study. You calculate. You wait for the enemy to reveal their weakness. Delilah thought she'd struck fear. What she'd actually done was wake instincts I hadn't used since Iraq, the ones that catalog every angle, every pattern, every supply line. She wanted ripples gone from her perfect lake. But she didn't know this water didn't belong to her. Not in the way she believed. I looked at the violation notice again, wind tugging at its edges. 72 hours. That was her ultimatum. Mine was simpler. She'd just declared war on the wrong man. The paint didn't wash off. Not with soap, not with scrubbing until my hands burned raw. Every swipe of the rag just smeared the orange deeper into the fiberglass, like guilt ground into skin. I gave up when my reflection appeared between the dripping streaks, fractured, a man staring back at himself through someone else's rage. That morning, I stood on Uncle Ezra's dock with coffee cooling in my hand, the lake spread out like glass. It should have been calm, the kind of silence that heals scars. Instead, my gut thrummed with the same tension I'd felt guiding convoys through pirate waters. Knowing eyes were on me, waiting for me to move first. That's when I heard the click. Not a gun. Of heels. Sharp, deliberate. Each step echoing across wood as if the dock itself disapproved. Delilah Thornfield. She didn't need an introduction. The lake announced her long before her perfume arrived. Chemical flowers, overwhelming pine, and morning dew. Mr. Blackwood. Her voice was syrup layered over steel. We have a problem. I didn't move. Just let the steam from my mug rise like smoke between us. Looks like I do. She didn't even glance at the vandalism, at the raw insult blazing orange across my boat. No, her gaze was on the water, calm and perfect, as if it were her reflection she protected, not the lake itself. Your vessel creates disturbances. She lifted her clipboard like it was a sort of law. Ripples. They disturb the aesthetic harmony we maintain here. I barked a laugh, short and humorless. Ripples. That's what this is about. Her smile didn't flinch. The community has standards. You'll remove it within 72 hours, or the fines begin. I should have said more. I should have pointed to the orange paint dripping at our feet, demanded answers, threatened police reports. But her calm, so precise, so rehearsed, chilled me more than the vandalism. This wasn't personal passion. It was performance. She played this part before, dozens of times, and most people folded. But I'd seen dictators in pressed uniforms before. Different language, same hunger. Delilah turned, heels clicking away, perfume lingering like smoke after a gunshot. Her fortress across the water gleamed as the sun rose, glass walls reflecting gold. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. She thought the matter was settled. That evening, I called Sage. 15 years old, halfway between child and stranger. Divorce had made me the weekend dad, the parent she tolerated out of duty. Hey, kiddo, I said. Hey. Her voice was flat, distracted, probably scrolling. I was thinking, maybe next weekend you come up here. I'll take you out on the boat. You can actually see the stars instead of city lights. Silence. Then I don't know, Dad. Mom says it's complicated. Complicated. That word had been a knife in my ribs since the divorce. Too complicated to visit. Too complicated to stay the night. Too complicated to just be your dad. I swallowed hard. Well, the invitation's always open. When the call ended, the silence pressed in heavier than any ocean I'd crossed. That boat was supposed to be for her. For us. A bridge across the gap that divorce had carved into both of us. And Delilah had chosen it as her battlefield. I started watching the neighborhood. Old habit. Observe, don't interfere. The pattern emerged fast. Cars slowed near my property. Curtains shifted when I stepped onto the porch. Neighbors averted their eyes in the grocery store, lips pressing into tight lines. It wasn't just me she'd marked. This entire lake was her stage, and every resident played their part out of fear. An old man, Vietnam vet, judging by the cap he wore, caught my eye once at the mailbox. He hesitated, glanced at Delilah's glass house across the lake, then leaned closer. She won't stop, you know. Not until you're gone. Why do people let her? I asked. His jaw tightened. Because she ruins the ones who fight back. Hendersons. Stewarts. You'll hear the stories. Then he shuffled away like a man who'd already lost too many battles. That night, lying awake in Ezra's cabin, I felt the weight of every whisper, every shuttered glance. The vandalism wasn't an isolated act. It was a message, a warning shot. Delilah wasn't just trying to erase my boat. She was testing me the way predators test the weak. She thought she knew what kind of man I was. A divorce with a teenage daughter who barely spoke to him. A tired veteran clinging to an inheritance. But predators make mistakes when they assume prey is easy. And as I stared at the ripples across the lake under the moonlight, I realized something Delilah had never considered. Sometimes ripples become waves. And waves can drown tyrants. The storm hit just before midnight. Not rain, wind. The kind that races down the mountain like it's fleeing some invisible predator, ripping branches loose and hammering the cabin walls until the logs groaned like old soldiers. I lay awake on the couch, listening when a new sound cut through the chaos. Bang! Scrape! Bang! I bolted outside, flashlight in hand. My uncle's boat, the one already scarred by paint, was no longer tied secure. It drifted 20 yards from shore, smashing against rocks with every gust, gouging fresh wounds into fiberglass. The dock lines weren't frayed. They were sliced clean. Someone had been here. My light caught movement. A figure slipping into a car at the roadside. White SUV. Tail lights vanished into the storm. By dawn, the damage was plain. Long gashes ran along the hull, like claw marks carved by something angry and personal. This wasn't vandalism anymore. This was sabotage. I pulled the security footage from the cameras I'd installed around the dock. Grainy night vision, but clear enough. Someone kneeling, knife in hand, severing my lines. And there, at the frame's edge, Delilah's BMW. Proof. Finally, proof. But as I watched that shadowy figure slice through my family's legacy, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something colder. This wasn't about a boat anymore. This was about control. And she had just crossed into open warfare. I drove into town the next morning, straight to the courthouse. 6 hours in the basement archives, the air thick with dust and mildew. Page after page of old covenants and deeds. Most of it was boilerplate suburban tyranny. Rules about grass height, house paint colors, approved mailboxes. But then, buried deep, nearly a century old, I found something. A yellowed document, folded at the edges. 1923. The ink faded but legible. The deed. The words leapt out at me. Riparian ownership extends to the high water mark. Perpetual rights to lake water usage retained by grantor and heirs. I didn't fully understand the legal language, but I knew instinct when it screamed. This wasn't a technicality. This was something big. For the first time since inheriting Ezra's place, I realized this wasn't just my uncle's cabin. It wasn't just his dock. This lake had never belonged to the HOA. Maybe it had never belonged to anyone but us. I carried the document out of that courthouse like a live grenade, heart pounding. That night, I sat on the porch with the deed spread across the table, Sage's photo propped beside it. She hadn't answered my last call. The silence between us felt wider than the Rockies themselves. I thought of what she'd see if she came this summer. Her dad painted as a criminal, neighbors avoiding him, a boat bleeding neon orange into clear water. And suddenly, it wasn't just about fighting Delilah. It was about proving to my daughter that I wasn't powerless, that I could defend what mattered, that our family's legacy meant something. Ezra had lived here for 30 years without bowing to anyone. Was I really going to surrender after 30 days? The old man had once told me, a lake reflects the man who stewards it. Still water, still heart. Troubled water, troubled mind. Looking at the vandalized hull drifting under moonlight, I knew, if I let Delilah dictate my life here, then the ripples would never stop. They'd spread into Sage's life, into the memory of this place, poisoning everything Ezra had built. And that was the moment the storm inside me stilled. I wasn't going anywhere. The twist wasn't just the deed. It was the realization that the battlefield had shifted. Until then, I'd thought I was defending a boat, a dock, a fragile inheritance of wood and fiberglass. Now, I understood I might own something far greater, the water itself. And if that was true, then Delilah wasn't just trespassing on my peace, she was trespassing on my family's birthright. I folded the deed carefully, slid it into a weatherproof case, and placed it beneath the flag Ezra had flown from the dock for decades. My hands didn't shake anymore. The war wasn't about to begin. It already had. And for the first time, I was the one holding the high ground. The days that followed felt like living under siege. Not with bullets or mortars. Those I could have handled. This was quieter, subtler, but just as relentless. Anonymous letters stuffed in my mailbox. You don't belong here. Flyers taped to my door claiming my boat was toxic to fish habitats. And then came the county inspectors, clipboards in hand, muttering about complaints of fuel runoff and hazardous storage. Every time I showed them the spotless bilge, the clean water samples, the maintenance logs. Every time they left unconvinced, like someone higher up had already told them what to believe. Delilah wasn't just trying to break me. She was building a story. A narrative where I was the villain, the outsider, the danger. And the neighbors? They bought it. At the general store, conversations cut off when I walked in. On my evening walks, curtains shifted. People I'd waved to days earlier suddenly found urgent reasons to stare at their shoes. It was working. She was isolating me. One evening, I caught my reflection in the cabin window. Unshaven, eyes ringed, jaw tight. I looked less like a man and more like a soldier on deployment. I hated it. This was supposed to be my sanctuary. Ezra's gift wasn't meant to turn me into a combatant again. That night, I dialed Sage. For once, she picked up. Dad. Her voice was small, tired. I pictured her curled in her room, face lit by her phone screen. Hey, sweetheart. Just want to check in. Silence. Then, Mom says you're in some kind of fight? With neighbors? The word stung worse than any fine or notice. Delilah's poison had seeped beyond these mountains. I closed my eyes. It's not a fight. It's about standing up when someone pushes too far. Sounds like drama, she said flatly. Maybe. My throat tightened. But Sage, this place, it's ours. Your uncle built it with his own hands. He believed in living free. I stopped not trusting my voice. I want you to know I'm not giving up. Not on this place. Not on us. She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, I'll come this summer. Just don't make it worse, okay? The line clicked dead before I could reply. But for the first time in weeks, there was a thread of hope, fragile as fishing line. The next morning, Delilah made her boldest move yet. A notice nailed to the dock post in bright red ink. Emergency motion. Immediate removal of all vessels exceeding 25 feet. Fines begin today. Attached was a petition. Half the community's signatures scrawled beneath her threat. I stood there, the lake mirror calm at my feet, paper trembling in my hand. My boat, Ezra's boat, suddenly reclassified as contraband. That's when Jim Santos appeared. Vietnam vet, stooped but steady. He glanced at the notice, then at me. She's done this before, he muttered. Got the Hendersons for tomatoes. The Stewarts for painting their fence. Folks sign because they're scared, not because they believe. I studied him. And you? He shrugged. Fought worse in '68. Can't stomach fighting her alone. But if you got proof she's bluffing, I thought of the deed still locked safe inside. Proof that this lake wasn't hers. Maybe never had been. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. By week's end, sabotage turned brazen. My dock lights cut. My engine intake stuffed with rags. Night footsteps on gravel that vanished when I opened the door. Each act only hardened my resolve. But inside, the weight pressed down. I wasn't just fighting Delilah. I was fighting time, fighting perception, fighting the slow erosion of will that breaks even strong men. The lake shimmered each morning like it had secrets, and I knew the truth buried in Ezra's papers was the only weapon sharp enough to cut through her lies. But revealing it meant more than just winning. It meant changing everything, for me, for the neighbors, even for Sage. Once I showed my hand, there was no going back. The question gnawed at me in the quiet hours. Do I want peace, or do I want justice? Because peace meant surrendering, and justice could tear this entire community apart. The night before the emergency HOA meeting, I sat on the dock, stars scattering across the water. My hands rested on Ezra's flag folded beside me, the deed tucked underneath. Delilah thought tomorrow she'd bury me with rules and signatures. But tomorrow I would stand up in front of all of them, with proof not just of ownership but of her lies. The storm was coming, and this time I wasn't waiting it out. The community center smelled of pine cleaner and fear. Folding chairs scraped against the hardwood as residents shuffled in, whispering like schoolchildren before a principal's lecture. Delilah stood at the front in a cream suit, pearls flashing under fluorescent light, clipboard tucked against her chest like a shield. Her fortress smile didn't falter when I entered. If anything, it sharpened, as though she were savoring my walk to the gallows. Mr. Blackwood, she said smoothly, voice amplified by the microphone. Perfect timing. Tonight, the board will address your repeated violations, your environmental damage, and your refusal to cooperate with community standards. Afterward, we will vote on immediate boat removal and emergency assessments to repair the harm you've caused. The room hummed with murmurs. Eyes darted to me, some pitying, others hostile, most simply afraid. I carried no clipboard, no suit, just the weathered folder under my arm, the one I'd spent weeks protecting like contraband. Delilah began her presentation. Enlarged photographs of my boat filled the projector screen. Tilted angles, harsh shadows, making Ezra's Pride look like a looming oil rig. This, she declared, stabbing at the image with her pointer, is not compatible with our vision of Alpine Lake. Property values have already begun to decline. Safety concerns are rising. Children are at risk. Her experts lined up one by one. A kayak rental owner claiming my wake threatened shoreline stability. A neighbor measuring engine noise with a smartphone app. A self-appointed environmentalist reciting Wikipedia-level jargon. By the time she opened the floor, the room buzzed with rehearsed outrage. His boat wakes me at dawn. My grandchildren are afraid to swim. He doesn't even mow his lawn like the rest of us. Each voice felt like a stone lobbed to my chest. I thought of Sage. What if she saw this? Would she believe them? Would she think her father really was the problem? Delilah's smile widened. The evidence is overwhelming. Unless Mr. Blackwood has anything further, yes. My voice cut through the room, quiet but steady. I stepped forward, folder in hand. Edo. I placed the first page on the projector. The 1923 deed, blown up across the screen, its century-old script glowing like scripture. This, I said, is the original deed for Alpine Lake. It does not grant authority to the HOA. It does not permit restrictions. What it says, clearly in black ink, is that the lake, its bed, and its waters were retained by the Blackwood family. My family. That means this isn't Delilah's lake. It isn't the HOA's. It's mine. The room froze. No coughs, no whispers, just silence so sharp it rang in my ears. I clicked the next page. Survey maps, boundary lines glowing red. Docks, gazebos, platforms. Every structure shown trespassing into my zone. For 38 years, I continued, voice firm. This HOA has been collecting fees for access they never owned. Every dock, every swim platform, every so-called improvement has been built on private property, my property. That's not community stewardship. That's theft. Gasps. Someone dropped their pen. Delilah's face drained of color, then flushed scarlet. She lurched toward the mic. This is absurd. Technicalities, irrelevant technicalities. The community has prescriptive rights through long usage. I raised a hand, cutting her off. Prescriptive rights don't override deeded ownership. And every lawyer in this state will tell you the same. I nodded to the back row. Sarah Chun, my attorney, stood, sleek briefcase in hand. Mr. Blackwood's claims are valid, she said, voice cool and professional. We filed a preliminary injunction. Until a court decides otherwise, any attempt to restrict his use or collect lake-related fees constitutes trespass and fraud. The room erupted. Shouts, whispers, chairs scraping as neighbors turn on one another. I let the noise crest, then spoke again, calm and clear. I could end it here. I could demand the removal of every dock tomorrow. I could sue each of you for trespassing and recover decades of illegal fees. I could bankrupt this HOA overnight. Every eye fixed on me. Even Delilah's allies shrank from her shadow. But I won't. My voice softened. Because this lake wasn't meant to divide us. My Uncle Ezra lived here 30 years without lording power over anyone. He believed neighbors should share what nature gave us. I believe that too, which is why I'm offering this, $50 a year. That's it, $50 for legal access, instead of the hundreds you've been paying in illegal fees. Your docks stay. Your swimming stays. Your peace stays. The only thing that changes is this. Delilah's reign ends tonight. The silence that followed was heavy, then broken by a single voice. Beth Morrison, retired teacher, raised her hand. I second that. Applause cracked the tension. It spread, tentative at first, then rolling like thunder, residents standing one by one. Delilah shouted into the mic, words drowned by the roar of people realizing their chains have been paper all along. And in that moment, watching her empire collapse under the weight of truth, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, not vengeance, relief. For the first time since I'd inherited this place, the water outside felt like it reflected me. Still, clear, free. 2 weeks after the meeting, Delilah's glass palace went dark. Curtains drawn, driveway empty, the throne abandoned. By the end of the month, a for sale sign leaned in her manicured lawn like a surrender flag. She didn't say goodbye. Not that anyone expected her to. Some tyrants vanish, not with a bang, but with the quiet of neighbors refusing to look up when they leave. The air around the lake changed almost overnight. Laughter carried across the water again, unguarded and genuine. Kids splashed from docks without their parents darting anxious glances toward her house. Evenings no longer echoed with clipboards or veiled threats, but with barbecue smoke and guitars. People began stopping by my cabin, hesitant at first. Pies, bottles of bourbon, handshakes that lingered longer than courtesy required. They weren't just thanking me for winning a legal battle. They were thanking me for restoring something they'd forgotten they had the right to: peace. Beth Morrison came one morning with a watercolor painting of the boat. Gentle strokes, soft ripples, the whole rising against the light. She called it Waves of Freedom. I hung it above the fireplace, next to Uncle Ezra's old tools, where it catches the dawn light like a blessing. Sage arrived that summer. She stepped out of the car with earbuds in, backpack slung low, the practiced indifference of a teenager masking nerves. "Hey, Dad," she said, eyes skimming over the cabin, the lake, the boat still scarred faintly but whole. "Hey, kiddo," I replied, trying not to overplay the moment. "Want to see something?" I led her down to the dock, handed her the rope, showed her how to tie a cleat hitch. At first she fumbled, rolled her eyes, muttered, "This is dumb." But when the knot held, when the boat stayed secure under her hand, something flickered in her face. Pride. Connection. That evening we pushed out onto the water. The lake reflected stars, so sharply it felt like sailing through the sky. Sage leaned against the railing, phone forgotten, hair whipping in the wind. For the first time in years, her laugh carried across the water, bright and unbroken. It wasn't just a laugh. It was proof that she still trusted me enough to find joy here. That the lake wasn't just my inheritance. It was our bridge. In September, I set up the Alpine Lake Conservation Scholarship. $5,000 each year, drawn from the settlement money, dedicated to students who wanted to protect water, land, and community. First recipient, a local kid who spent summers fishing this very lake. His essay ended with a line that made me smile. Water doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to everyone brave enough to defend it. Ezra would have liked that. And yet, victory wasn't sweet in the way movies promise. The lake didn't cheer. It didn't crown me king. It just went on, rippling in wind, reflecting storms, swallowing secrets. Some mornings I sat on the dock and thought about Delilah, about how power eats people alive, turning fear into fuel until there's nothing left but the hunger. I almost pitied her. Almost. But then Sage would come padding down barefoot, hair tangled from sleep, asking if we could take the boat out before breakfast. And I'd remember, not all ripples are destructive. Some carry forward. Some make the water better. The last time I scrubbed the orange scars from the hull, I realized they'd never fully fade. No matter how much polish I used, the faint outline remained. Trash, ghosted across the fiberglass. I left it there, not as a wound, but as a reminder that tyranny can brand, but it cannot define. That inheritance isn't just what's given to us, but what we choose to protect. That night, as the sun bled gold across the mountains, I sat on the deck with coffee warming my palms. The flag Ezra once flew snapped in the breeze above me, its fabric catching the same light as the water below. The lake was calm. My heart was calm. And when the boat moved, sending ripples across the glass, they didn't feel like violations anymore. They felt like proof I was alive. Proof that freedom, once defended, never disappears. It only spreads outward like rings on the water, carrying into tomorrow.